Hey, everybody, and welcome to Notes from the Other Side. This is a podcast for people who love Jesus but have some real concerns about Christianity. Here at Notes, we take a microscope to some of Christianity's thornier topics and people using a progressive theological lens and a socio-historical approach to studying the Bible. So if that sounds like your jam, come on in and have a seat. But buckle up, it might get bumpy. All right, everybody. Welcome back to Notes from the Other Side. This is a podcast where we take a microscope to some of Christianity's thornier topics and people. I'm your host, Tiziana, Mom So Hard Severse.
How are you momming so hard today?
I took a picture of my daughter's poop.
I never saw that coming.
Nope. Neither did I, quite frankly. Yeah. We have to go to the doctor today. I'm like, is there something wrong with this? It's one of those things where we don't we don't live in a society where it's really appropriate to share photos of your daughter's bowel movements with people. But I'm telling you, I wish I could show it to you. I've never seen anything like this.
Oh my God.
And
if this wasn't a podcast, I would ask you to describe it because I'm just now I'm curious.
I know.
But I think I'm going to leave it out because there's a lot of people that will not want that.
No, I mean, I would venture a guess to say most people. There's a handful of us weirdos.
Yeah, what do you mean weird poop?
Right. And it's coming on the tail end of she's been kind of sick and has been a hard time getting over it. So we're starting to be kind of curious if maybe there's not another issue going on, in terms of GI stuff. So I'm Mom So Harmed today by taking photographs of my children's bowel movements. And everybody listening in, that voice belongs to Andy Rocketman Bishop.
Pacow.
Behind the glass. We are sans Rick today because speaking of poop.
Rickless.
We are Rickless. Rickless. Yeah. No. Rickless. Rick's also not feeling well. So I think there must be some sort of bug going around. But we have a very special episode for you guys today. I've been talking about this, and I'm really excited. We have a special guest host that I've been trying to get on the show for 2 years. This is a very exclusive and hard to get,
hard-hitting interview that nobody else is going to have.
That no one else is going to have in honor of May and Mother's Day. Everybody, welcome our special interview guest today, my mom. Hi, Mom.
Hi, honey. Glad to see you.
It's good to see you too. You guys are only listening, but we're doing this. We're recording this in the studio via Zoom, and Kelly Hains is our special guest today. It's a special interview that we've been talking about for a long time, both in honor of Mother's Day and also May being Mental Health Awareness Month. Kelly, you are a nurse practitioner. You can tell us a little bit about your job?
I've been a nurse practitioner since 2011, and I work for the Navajo Nation in Northeast Arizona. I've been there about 6.5 years, and I do primary care. Mm-hmm. I take care of adults. And in that position, it's physically, more their physical needs, diabetes, hypertension, but there is some mental health as well. We do mild depression. We do referrals for the behavioral health program that we have on site. And, but it's just been probably the highlight of my career working with this group of people. And it's an honor to be up there.
Yeah. Well, what we're going to do now is, I wanted to talk to you about your story and where you started and how you got here, because it's a fascinating story. And I wish Rick was here because he's quite frankly a better interviewer than me.
he's good.
Really good. But we're going to start. We're going to kick off this episode. Now that we know where you ended up, we're gonna start from the beginning. And
I'm very excited. Tizzy has kind of giving me little snippets, tiny snippets, just to.
But we're going to start this episode the way we start every testimony series on the show, and that is by asking you what is your earliest recollection of hearing the name Jesus?
Well, my grandmother was a Sabbath school teacher, and she was a Seventh-day Adventist, and they go to church on Saturdays, and so they would have Sabbath school. And so I think my first real recollection about hearing about Jesus was probably 4 or 5, and she had a poster of Jesus in a garden with a lot of little children around him, and I remember thinking, "Oh, he seems nice," but I didn't think too much about it. I went for the goodies. They had little snacks afterwards, and. But that was the first time I ever really remember hearing about him. I'm sure they sang songs to me and things earlier than that, but that was my first real recollection about 5 years old.
Yeah, was with your grandmother. Where was this?
Hmm.
Where's this location wise? Where'd you grow up?
It was in Port Angeles, Washington, which is on the Olympic Peninsula. And the church actually is still there. It's not a real big congregation, but it's very fundamental in a lot of ways. And so the gospel and the salvation story is accurate, and
Yeah, and the
they
denomination.
did a lot of missionary work in that church.
And is it still? It's still a Seventh Day Adventist church.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Wow, out in the sticks in Port Angeles. Now I remember Grandma Cook's house was in Black Diamond.
Yeah, that's in Port Angeles.
Yeah, so even farther out for you map nerds that are
I wish I knew anything about this place because I wish I knew anything about Washington. It looks
okay.
beautiful.
Here's a fun tidbit. Have you ever heard of a little book series turned film series
Ooh.
called Twilight?
Yeah, just once
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah, here and there.
Here and there.
So Twilight was written by Stephanie Myers, and she chose to place the story, and this is a part of the story, right, where there's the least amount of sun
Oh
in
yeah.
the contiguous United States. That's Forks, Washington, about 30 minutes away from where we're talking about right now.
So basically, where you're talking about.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah,
Same place.
It's dark
30 minutes is nothing.
and wet. It's it's a beautiful giant forest. The whole rainforest is out there. The Olympic National Forest is out there, just spread out. I mean, I drove around Lake Crescent one time, which is a lake out there. I remember I was showing somebody, and we pulled over just to watch, and literally watched a bald eagle swoop down from the sky and snatch a fish out of
That's
the
very
lake
cool.
and drive away. I was like, yeah.
And you're like, why does it have fangs?
This is where I go. Yeah.
Sorry. All right,
Yeah,
all right.
why
And,
does it have fangs?
Right.
But yeah, so for anyone listening that's not familiar with the Olympic Peninsula, that's the kind of the area that we're talking about. So you're 5 years old, and this is your first experience hearing the name Jesus and going to church with your grandmother. Tell me a little bit about the rest of your immediate family at that point. You're 4 years old.
Yeah, we had just moved back to Port Angeles, and about 2 years later, my parents got a divorce, and I was 7, going on 8.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, my dad was really my favorite parent. Everybody has one, and dad was mine. And, it was just devastating. I mean, he was my highlight. He'd come home from work and, Daddy, Daddy, and so it was really a hard breakup. And my grandma took me a lot that summer just to kind of keep me out of the whirlwind of the divorce. And so that summer was a vacation Bible school. It was called, Vacation Bible School. And you would go every day for a week
Mm-hmm.
and do arts and crafts and learn about Jesus. And at the end of the program, the little kids would get up and sing a few songs that they learned and do that for the congregation. And so we'd had our little week, and I heard the gospel a couple times. I'm like 3rd grade. And I started singing this song, into my heart, come into my heart, Lord Jesus. Anyway, I started singing that song, and for some reason, I was singing it with all my heart. And I really meant it. If Jesus was real, I wanted him to come in. And in my mind's eye, I saw this really old-fashioned heart-shaped Valentine like you'd see in the 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
And in the center of this heart was a little scene of a nice warm fire and a big overstuffed chair
Mm-hmm.
that looked so inviting. And in my heart and in my mind, I thought the Lord said to me, if you invite me in,
Mm-hmm.
I'll come into your heart and I will live there.
Mm-hmm.
And he did. And from that point on, I knew Jesus. And it wasn't just I knew who he was, but it was kind of like he would guide me. And it was actually such perfect timing because my little world was shattered, but I still had a beacon to follow.
Yeah.
So there was sort of this awareness of right and wrong, good and bad, moral, immoral, that had sort of awakened in my spirit. And so even though everything was falling apart, it was kind of, I thought, wow, Jesus is real. And now he's helping me. So from
Hmm.
then on, I always had kind of like a running conversation in my mind with the Lord, like, well, should I do this? What do you think?
Hmm.
Type of thing, because my parents were pretty self involved at that point.
Hmm.
So I was kind of on my own.
How many years ago? How are you 67 now or 66?
I'll be 69
You'll
in
be
May, end of
69.
this month. Yeah.
Yeah, and so this
So
is 60
61 years
years
ago.
ago. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I'm looking at your face and I can hear your voice getting even choked up and I can see the tears in your eyes even all these years later because that's how
Mm-hmm.
fresh and powerful that moment was for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your parents got divorced. You're 7. Your dad moved out, leaving you and your
My
mom
sister.
and your sister. Now, how old was? Tell us about her. I
She
have to
was
act like I
5.
don't know.
I know, I know. That's
Yeah, she was
tough.
5 years old, my little
Yeah.
sister. And then my mom also had a roommate to kind of help defray costs. And the roommate had 2 daughters that were about our age. So we kind of we we would had to sleep in the same bed. So my sister and the little girl would sleep in one, and then myself and the other little girl would sleep in. And we
Hmm.
would lay there and talk. And I remember she would tell me things, and I was kind of shocked about her stepdad and some of the experiences she had with him. And it was
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
like a new awakening. And I thought, oh dear, this
Right.
doesn't sound normal,
Right.
And I didn't know if she was lying or telling me the truth, but that was the first time I ever heard about anything like that. And then
Yeah.
shortly after that, I started having, some experiences of my own, which weren't
Right.
real normal,
Right.
and kind of got a rude awakening. And the Lord was in my mind, would say things like, you know, tell somebody, or this is not right, or stay away from him, or make sure your sister's with you. I'd hear these little urgings in my head. So I started realizing, things can happen that aren't so nice when you're little, even. So that
Right.
was kind of till I was about 10. And then my mom ended up marrying a gentleman that was an alcoholic. He was a good provider. We had a house and a nice car and all that. But she worked nights. And so as he would drink in the night, then I was kind of there with him,
Hmm.
which was
Right.
also not always a good
Yeah, it
experience.
sounds. Yeah,
So
it
there was just
sounds
a lot
possibly
of
problematic.
Yeah.
chaos and you know
Yeah.
going on when I was little.
And so I know you and I know that you're being careful and particular with your language, but you and I have had this conversation. It's
Yeah.
almost like in the period of time that you were living, which this is all circa what, 1960,
Yeah.
1965, is it's almost like as soon as the figurehead, the male protector was removed from your home, like all the neighborhood creeps came out,
Oh yeah. Yeah. It was
the
very crazy. I mean,
yeah. But these were
and the thing
gentlemen.
is,
Hmm.
in those days, I tried to tell my principal at school what was going on. And I think he was horrified and didn't know what to do with the information. So he just kind of didn't do anything. Told my first grade teacher,
Right.
she was mortified, and didn't do
Oh
anything.
my God.
Tried to tell my mom. And I remember hearing hushed voices in the bedroom arguing with him, and him saying, she misunderstood. There's no way.
Right.
Don't believe that. I don't know where she's getting this idea. And, in the 60s, you needed to have income to live. And my mom had just gone through a very devastating time with no income, and we were on public assistance and all that. So I don't think she wanted to give up that security. And plus, it was such kind of a horrific disclosure that I don't think she wanted to believe it either. So I kind
Yeah.
of figured, well, I guess I'm on my own.
Wow.
And
At
so
10
I
years old.
remember, yeah,
And even
yeah.
younger,
And so,
because I remember this is how we talk a little bit, I think, nowadays about like the world being terrible and how much worse it is now than it was then. But I remember you telling me a story one time about losing your sister's ring and having to go, your mom just telling you, just go across the street to the
oh
park.
yeah,
Just go across the
yeah.
street to the park and get the ring. And you were what, 8, 9?
I was probably 9, and we'd gotten birthday gifts, and they were birthstones, and mine was green and hers was blue because we had different birthdays, and I liked the blue one better, so I wore hers and went over to the park to play and lost it.
Mm-hmm.
And so mom was, upset and said, "You go over there and look for it, see if you can find it." When I was over there, there was a gentleman wearing a hat and sunglasses, and he had his hands in his pocket, and he said, "Oh, can you help me? I have something in my pocket. Can you help me? It
Ooh.
needs to move over to the other side." And it was like, okay, stupid
Right. You
me.
don't, well, no, not stupid, Mom. You didn't know.
No, yeah.
You
That's
were a
not.
little kid, and
It's
you
like,
had no
yeah.
adults paying attention
Yes.
in a society where adults were almost turning a blind eye to probably the same trauma they experienced, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Well, the thing is, as this whole scenario was coming down, he started to take my hand and was going to take me somewhere. And my mom just happened to poke her head out the window, which was just across the street, and yelled
Lordy.
my name. And I said, "Oh, that's my mom." And I jerked my hand away and ran over to the house.
Right.
But
That's
I was oblivious.
insanity.
And it wasn't until years later I thought back and I thought, like I was a weirdo. My
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
you
Who,
know, because I was
yeah.
just a little kid. I had no idea.
Right.
And then shortly after that, get this, we went over to a neighbor's house to play,
Mm-hmm.
and the dad had made stilts. And everybody had a pair of stilts except me. And I said, "Oh, wish I could have a pair of stilts," because they were, playing on them. And he said, "Oh, I think there's some stilts in the garage. Come in here." So I went in the garage with him, just as innocent as could be. And he goes, "Look way up in those rafters. I think there's some up there. Just keep looking." And of course,
Yeah.
that wasn't the right thing to do.
Right.
So I got out of there, and I remember one of the neighbor kids, Cindy, said, "Don't ever be alone with that guy. He's a weirdo." And I
Right.
thought, yeah, no kidding. So I'm thinking, well, do I just have
Yeah.
molest me on my forehead?
Yeah.
It was just
Oh,
like
it's
too many
really
things
sad.
happening.
And all at
So
once in this short period of time.
oh yeah, it was like as soon as
Yeah.
my dad was out of the house,
Right.
and as soon as I knew
Sure.
the Lord, all these things started happening. I remember thinking, isn't Jesus supposed to protect you from things like this?
Right.
Which in reality, he was probably protecting me from things far worse.
Right.
So it was, looking back, it's like, oh, this could have happened or that could have happened,
Yeah.
And then one
Jesus was
time I
like
was
doing
being
his best to
babysitted.
mitigate the damage as much as possible. But,
Mhm.
that's one of the things we talk about a lot. And that's one of the, reasons why I think the New Testament especially talks a lot about how we are God's hands on the earth. God uses
Yeah.
people. And so if you're telling people, and even if the Holy Spirit is prompting your principal's heart and your teacher's heart, help her, they still have to make the decision. And these people are just
Oh,
all
yeah.
around you, just consistently dropping the ball and leaving you vulnerable.
Well, I didn't act upset, or I didn't act, I mean, it was never anything like violent. So that was probably less shocking or less
Mhm.
imprintable as far as the damage for a psyche of a little kid. But I mean, there was so many other things. It's crazy. One time we had to get babysitted at a foster home because the lady that was our babysitter was in the hospital having a baby. So we were at this foster home that was friends of my mom, and one of the older boys said, "Oh, Kelly, I have a book club, and I have tons of books out here. You want to come see my books?" Because the boys lived kind of in a separate bunkhouse on this
Mhm.
ranch. So I said, "Sure." So I'm going out there because he was real nice, clean cut looking kid. And then the guy that was sort of the hood with the leather and the slick back hair, about 2 minutes later, he burst into the bedroom and he says, "You get out of here, Kelly. Leave her alone," and shoved me out the front door.
Mhm.
And then later he said, "Don't ever be alone with that guy. He's weird."
Right.
And
Wow. At
whenever I
least
would be
somebody was
babysitted
there.
there,
Yeah.
the kid that was sort of perceived as the hood,
Right.
the bad guy,
Yeah.
protected me. And another little girl that was there too.
Yeah.
So, looks can be deceiving
Yeah.
in that regard. And I learned that early. I thought, oh, because he seemed like the bad boy, and really the good boy that
Right.
looked nice was the one that was evil, so to speak.
Yeah.
So
I have a
good
friend.
lesson for me, I guess.
I have a friend that's a black man with a grill and a neck tattoo and dreads. And I am much more comfortable getting in his car at 1:00 in the morning after being at the Funk Jam in downtown Asheville. And have much more readily than some, clean cut college kid, white boy with a pop collar,
Mm-hmm.
But so at what point, because at some point a protector did step in. Walk us through that.
Yep. When I was in about, oh gosh, seventh grade. Well, actually, fifth grade. In fifth grade, I'd heard all these rumors. There was a bunch of kids that were going to be transferred from Monroe School to Washington School, and some of their reputation preceded them when they first coming. And I was in fifth grade, and I remember the sixth graders showed up. Of course, we were all interested. What do the boys look like? You know, little kids. And I remember the first time I ever saw Bucky, he was walking up the ramp and he had a football in his hand. He was kind of tossing it. And for some reason, his face just imprinted in my heart so strongly. And I thought, oh, he's cute, you know. And so from fifth grade to about seventh grade, I kind of did everything I could to sort of be wherever he might be, just in case he might like me. And in the eighth grade, well, the end of seventh grade, beginning eighth grade, that whole summer, we kind of like, we'd go fishing. It was all very innocent fishing. We'd go shoot. He had a little 22 and we'd go shoot mud ducks or, you know, just fun things. But the fishing was a lot of fun. And that started a kind of our boyfriend girlfriend relationship. And that summer between seventh and eighth grade, his dad had a brother. So he worked for his uncle, pulling rigging and doing, well, logging basically, and made a man's wages that whole summer.
Well, now
which
let's
was a lot of
here
money.
for a second, because he's older than you. How much older than you was Bucky?
2 years.
2 years older than you. So you were in between 7th and 8th grade. So you're 13, 12, 13.
Correct.
14
Correct.
maybe. And so he's like 16, 15.
Wow. So,
well, we were 13 and 15.
Yeah,
and
13
so
and 15. Okay.
During that time, after he'd been working, I disclosed what was happening at my house.
Mm-hmm.
And his parents were alcoholics, and there was a lot of fighting, cops in and out for violence and stuff like that. And so the year before, my aunt had gotten pregnant and got married. And I thought, he makes money. I could get pregnant. We could get married and we won't have to we'll live in our own house. So we devised a plan to get me pregnant, and he would just quit school and go work for his uncle.
And you're 13.
And we'd get our own place.
Wow.
And I would get out of the house. Yeah, I was 13.
13, and he is 15. But you'd known each other for a couple of years because you met him when you were in like 6th grade.
I knew him for 5 years by then.
It also sounds like you might have been
and so
the adults
and
in the
this
room.
Is,
this
and
plan.
This is interesting. Devise a plan because you didn't know how to get pregnant, right? You didn't really know much about it.
Well, we knew a little bit. I'm sure he knew more than I did. But he didn't want me to get in trouble. I mean, it took about 2 weeks to really talk him into it because it was my idea.
Right.
And he finally said, I'm sure he was interested in the activity, but, he was really thinking of the big picture. And once he decided that he was going to love me and marry me and we would do this, then it was okay. So I ended up getting pregnant. I found out that I was pregnant. And 2 weeks later, Howard moved out. My stepdad moved out. And I thought, oh, rats. Now I'm in this predicament. Yeah. So it was kind of weird because I had this premonition that I was going to have to fight for this baby. So I went down to the public assistance and I talked with a social worker and I wanted to know what was my rights. Mm-hmm. Here I'm like 13. What are my rights? What can my parents make me do?
And it's 1967? 1969. 13-year-old talking to...
Yeah. And they said, they can't do anything to you. They can't make you give your baby away. They can't make you get an abortion. They can't do anything. Abortion was illegal back then, but because of my age, medically, I could have gotten a medical termination.
Sure.
But I didn't want that.
Well, because you got pregnant on purpose. You know what I mean? It wasn't.
So I disclosed all of this. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I disclosed this to Bucky, of course, and he meanwhile was in 9th grade and I remember he went to school for like 2 weeks and dropped out and went to work, and his dad lied for him, said he was 18, even though he was only 15 and a half. Mm-hmm. And he went to work. He started working right away.
Yeah, because he was like, I got to get ready for this baby.
Mm-hmm. Right. And he had money. And then that I told my parents, and my mom took me to the doctor. And I remember Dr. Siemens had made an appointment at the University of Washington for me to have a termination because I was so young. They were afraid it would
kill
me because I was so little.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is one of the main dangers.
Actually.
Well, that's one of the reasons. That's one of the conversations that we are currently having in our current political climate, right? Is that there is a sort of danger, very real and present danger when children, are pregnant.
Oh yeah.
So what happened at that appointment though?
Well, they said that's what was going to happen, and I had to sign the consent form, and I said, no, I'm not signing that. I am not signing that consent form. Yeah. So I got put on restriction, which was kind of funny. And
Oh
I just,
my
What's that mean?
gosh. She got
Yeah.
grounded for not signing the consent form
Oh,
to receive an abortion.
that's
yeah. Well, my mom was
interesting.
terrified,
Oh,
you know.
well, she was not very old either. She had you when she was like
Well, she said, I'm not going to be
18
a
or
grandmother
19.
at age 32. That was one of her biggest worries, you know.
Yeah.
But I was like, okay, mom. So, you know, but she was young. And so I ended up uh, going to a foster home because I was running away and they said I was incorrigible. So I got put in a foster home.
Mm-hmm.
And then the foster home was crazy. The lady was an alcoholic. She was like 30 years younger than her husband, and she was having an affair. And it was like pretty obvious. So the foster home fell apart, and I ended up going to an unwed mother's home over in Tacoma, Washington. I was there for about 3 months.
Yeah.
And
Welcome to
and
where I
during
grew
that,
up, yo. Like, for sure. The sticks.
yeah, it was crazy.
This is 10 miles from where they used to send the perverted priests that were busted.
Oh, really?
They would send them up to the Inuit communities in Alaska. Alaska and Canada is a 30-minute boat ride from where I'm
Oh my
from.
God! So they would
like
send
the sticks. Yeah,
They would
like
send
the
them
sticks.
to the Inuits.
Yeah, to the native
Oh, that's
schools.
so
Yeah.
terrible. I mean, I guess
And
it's
those-
terrible no matter where they send them, but
Yeah.
but that feels somehow even more egregious.
And you know,
Yeah.
it was kind of funny because the nursing or the place where I went was ran by I think it was ran by the Presbyterians.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember they had gave us counseling,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the ladies that was my counselor, they tried to figure out a way that I could still attend school while I was there and not get behind in my school. So I remember I took one of them I took was the home ec. We had to have home ec. And so I worked in the kitchen with this big black lady. She was one of the biggest ladies I ever knew. And she had so many diamond rings. Each finger had a diamond ring. And she said, oh, yes. Every time my husband steps out, man, I get myself a new ring. And she was like the nicest lady. She was so sweet. I could never understand her because she had such a strong accent. And I was some little kid, from the sticks. And I remember she'd say, I want you to do, and she'd say something like this, and I couldn't understand. She goes, what's the matter with you, girl? You better clean out your ears. Now come over here and listen to me. So,
Yeah.
but she helped me learn so many things. She was the nicest lady. I was kind of scared of her when I first met her, but she was a strong Christian. And she says, child, you just got to listen to the Lord. The Lord will get you through anything. You just got to listen to the Lord. She was so strong.
Yeah.
And then and there was a traveling nurse that used to come and do our blood draws and make sure we were healthy and all that. And she was a Seventh-day Adventist. And I don't remember how it came up, but she said, she was telling me, and I said, oh, I was raised in the Seventh-day Adventist church. And so then she was the nicest lady, and she'd say, you pray about your choices. You make sure the Lord guides your choices. And so I remember thinking, God, I'm 13. Maybe I should give my baby up for adoption. Maybe I should. And I had a cousin who I loved, my favorite cousin, Bobby, and she and her husband could not have children.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, maybe I could give that baby to them and they'd have a baby and I could sort of keep an eye on him from afar and see how he grows up. I was really considering all these things and I had a dream. And it was one of those dreams,
Yeah.
really isn't your own dream. And in this dream, I'd had a little boy and I saw these loving hands giving this little boy to me. And I thought, oh, I think I'm supposed to keep him. So then I just put all those thoughts of giving him away. Oh, I gave that up. I thought, no, I'm keeping him. He's a gift to me. And in reality, he was a gift because as life went on, my boyfriend, Bucky, got into drugs, became a very bad heroin addict. And if I would have been without my son, who I loved more than anything, I probably would have went down that same path. But because I loved my son so much, I wanted to set a good example for him. For instance, I wanted to graduate from high school because if I didn't graduate, how could I tell him, well, you have to graduate from high school?
Mm-hmm.
I quit smoking because if I smoked, how could I tell him, you can't smoke? Because to me, do as I say, not as I do, never held any water. I was too stubborn. Well, if you're doing it, then I'm doing it.
Sure.
So it was really a wonderful experience that way. But the unwed mother's home, it was probably the best thing. It separated from my family, separated me from the violence and all the chaos, and gave me an opportunity to really think for myself. What did I want? And once I made that decision that I was going to keep that little boy, which I didn't know it was a boy, but it turned out it was, once I made that decision, then my life trajectory changed.
That's very interesting. You had a dream where you were getting handed a little boy, but back then they didn't do ultrasound imaging to
ultrasounds.
determine, so you didn't know what you were having until the baby was born.
Huh.
But yeah, you had that dream. So while you're in the unwed mother's home, where was Bucky? You guys were still dating, and you were still planning on getting married.
Well, he was working. Yeah. Sadly, he was working, and he was like, 15 and a half. Turned 16 that May, and I turned 14 that May. Our son was born in October. But he had all this money. He was living with his parents. He had all this money. And
An
the
adult
group
job.
of people that he worked with logging were drug users. They used marijuana, they used heroin, they used opium, they dropped LSD, so he just he wasn't really ever a drinker, but he did drugs, and he kind of got involved with those guys, and that's where his money started going. And when I came home and found out that during this time he'd become an addict, I thought, oh, he'll quit. Oh, he'll quit. He'll probably stop, because I'm 9th grade, he's 10th grade, supposed to be. And,
so you didn't really see each other while you were in the unwed mother home?
Occasionally, his parents would come pick me up and I could go home for a weekend. And of course, on weekends, he was good as gold. He acted normal.
Sure.
I didn't find out all this other stuff till we got back after our son was born. But I remember after my baby was born, my Aunt Helen and my grandma, the grandma that had taken me to church, come to pick me up, and they brought Bucky with them. And I thought, he didn't want to hold our son because he was scared. And I thought, nah, you're holding him. So I just kind of shoved him in his arms, and he cradled that little boy, and he cried.
Yeah.
Because he just knew this was a big deal to be a parent.
And to be clear,
and he wanted to be a better.
Bucky was his nickname. His name was Dennis.
Correct. I named our son
after him. Yeah. Dennis Michael Keys, right?
Right.
Yeah. And so now you've had the baby, you've decided to keep the baby. You are in 9th grade. You're coming to terms with the fact that Bucky's not necessarily not yet. He's like, at this point, Bucky's like, cool, let's move in together and stuff. Let's go get married.
Right. He had a house picked out.
And so this is like October, November. And what happened when you tried to get married?
Well, let's back up a little bit. I had gotten involved with remember when I went and talked with the social services, that the lady that I spoke with stayed in touch with me. And when I was in the unwed mother's home, my mom's live-in boyfriend had raped the neighbor lady, and there was a big court case going on. So she didn't want me to move into that environment. So she had contacted my grandma Cook.
Yeah.
And I was living up the hill with Grandma Cook. And Chip was staying there as well, my sister. But she started to have failure to thrive, and because she missed our mom so much. So she had to go back home. But by that time, the gentleman in question was in jail and eventually went to prison. So that was a little less stress on Chip to be in the home. But I mean, it was like, that was kind of horrible. But I wasn't there when that happened. Was in the unwed mother's home. But I came back and I lived with my grandma. My grandma was out of town. They had what's called a party line back in those days. So you could only use the phone a tiny bit. We had no television whatsoever. No. Get channel 12 in the winter. That was it.
Only in the winter.
Antenna outside. Yeah. The wind blew, it would turn around like ours did.
Yeah.
So when I would come home from school, the only thing I had really was homework and Dennis. And so that bonding period with that little baby was so strong during that time. Because when I would get home from school, my grandma would say, okay, you're on the clock.
Yeah.
And she would do all the house. I never even had to change my sheets, do my laundry, nothing. Right. My soul after school was homework and that baby. And I just grew to love him so much. He was like, and he was so cute too. He was the smartest little boy. He started speaking when he was like a year and a half. He was so smart, probably because I played with him all the time. Yeah. He could read when he was 3. I mean, we just loved him so much.
What did they feed him while you were at school? Like, tell me a little bit about that piece too.
Well, I nursed him. Because here you are.
Yeah, you're a mother in high school.
I nursed him when I was home until I went back to school, and I'm like in the 9th grade. And that first day back at school, I knew everybody was going to be stereotyping me because back in those days, it was quite horrific. I was the first girl allowed to go back to public school that had had a baby in our school district. ever.
What happened to the girls before you? They were like kicked out of school?
They were just they couldn't go back to school. They'd have to go to
But the boys who
get a
got them pregnant
GED.
probably could.
I'm sure.
Oh, of course.
Wow.
They weren't in trouble.
Sure.
But that first day back at school, I had borrowed my mom's blonde wig. It was like a beach blonde bubble wig. Put on a ton of makeup, wore a very risque outfit, and went to school to fit their stereotype.
Oh my gosh, the Scarlet, like the letter A, that movie with Emma Stone.
Oh, yeah, Scarlet Letter.
Yeah.
So I
you were
dressed
just
up
like,
the way
screw
I
it,
knew
sure.
they thought I would be.
Yeah.
And then acted kind of snotty to everybody and like I was better than them and all that. And then the very next day, I wore my long brown hair, my hippie jeans, my hippie shirt, my hippie beads, and was my old self. And when I came back to school, they were like, totally broke the ice. Oh, Kelly, oh my God, we thought you totally changed,
Yeah.
So I was just myself back at school. So that was good.
So
but I had PE and I was nursing. And so when I was in PE, my milk would let down. It would be so painful. So I'd have to express my milk in the toilet. So you'd hear this, choo, 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 and they were thinking, how are you going potty? What is that? It was just so weird. It was so crazy. I look back on that. Oh my goodness.
Had to
but
do that.
It all worked out.
So your milk dried up and your great grandma, your grandma was taking care of the grandbaby during the day. And you told me this one time, and that's the reason why I asked again. I like
what they fed him?
This.
The formula,
Formula
they
back in
really
1969. What was formula in 1969?
It was carnation milk that you would make, Caro syrup, and a dropper full of vitamins. And that's what it was. Caro syrup to make it sweet.
Wow.
So it was powdered milk, Caro syrup, and a dropper of and that's what we fed him.
That's what you fed him. Although you didn't go back to school till January. You had the boy in October, and you didn't go back to school until January.
He was about 3 months old.
He was breastfed
and actually, I breastfed him until he was 7 months old, but it was only at bedtime.
Yeah.
Bedtime in the middle of the night. So he did nurse till he was about 7 months old, and then everything was gone after that. But your body had
to readjust.
And they put me on the pill. My what happened was my case manager, that was the social worker, insisted that I go on the birth control pill. And back in those days, it was real strong, so it dried my milk up. Is what happened. Because if you nurse on demand, whenever you are nursing, if you do it at the same time every day, that milk will be there. But so that dried up. And I was on the pill, and that's how that happened.
But you didn't get married.
Acne.
You didn't get married.
Well, we tried to get married. We went to the court and put in a petition every year because our parents would not sign. And after the third year, when I was 17 and a junior in high school, and Bucky was 19, the Judge Johnson, signed our marriage certificate and said we could get married. And so we were so excited. We had a house. He was working.
And you've been co-parenting and
car.
dating this whole time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right,
you've been raising this baby and
and
he's working and hanging out on the weekends and.
Right.
Yeah.
And he was still doing drugs. But of course, I'm thinking, oh, he'll quit. Oh, he'll quit. And he would tell me he would quit. And what happened is he wanted me to drop out of high school. And I said, I'm not dropping out of high school. And I have 1 year left. He goes, I don't want my wife going to school. And I says, I'm not dropping out. I've worked so hard to make it this far. I'm not dropping out. I only have a year left. I have to. And he didn't, in his mind, he didn't want me to be more educated than him. Plus, he was afraid if I was around all the high school boys that I might,
fall in love with someone else.
Or something.
Yeah.
So he didn't want me to do that. So, and then we were kind of fighting about that. And I noticed on his upper left arm had marks from where he had tied off his arm to be able to shoot up. He had bruising. And I said, that was it. You've promised me you weren't doing drugs. Here, I see you are doing drugs. You're trying to be very controlling. I'm not doing this. And we split up. And he went crazy when we split up.
Yeah.
I mean, he had a pickup. At that time, I was sort of transitioning back to live with my mother because she'd gotten in a stable life, and I was married. She was getting with Lyle.
Yeah.
I was transitioning. So I was spending weekends there and kind of little by little moving my stuff down there. And I was at the house one time, and Bucky had a pickup, and he tried to run into our house, and instead he missed and ran into kind of like a ravine and broke his ankle.
Oh my God.
So he was on crutches. Yeah. This was like months later. This was like
he missed
January, February. Yeah. So it'd been like 6 months we'd been split up.
Yeah.
And I was in high school, and I had met this guy named Matt Neal, who was in my drama class, and he lived up the hill from, or down the hill from my grandma's house. And so what would happen is I would go to school.
Mm-hmm.
My mom would take Dennis to Grandma Cook's house.
Mm-hmm.
After school, I would walk down the hill to where she parked her car because she was working. I would get the car, go up the hill, pick up Dennis, and go home.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the drive was right by where Matt Neal lived. And so he was walking down the hill with me. And as we were walking down the hill, it kind of started snowing. And all of a sudden, I saw Bucky's pickup go by. And I said, "Oh my gosh, you need to get out of here. I just saw Bucky. He's really dangerous. You need to get out of here." He goes, "I'm not afraid of him." And I said, "No,
Oh
you don't
no.
understand.
Oh no.
He's a biker.
Yeah.
He's a dirty fighter.
He's been a
He could have a
full-blown,
knife or a
full-time
gun. I don't know
logger
what's going
since
on."
he was 9. Yeah.
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 So, and he says, "I'm not afraid." So we get down there, and the car was a Plymouth station wagon, one of those big
Mhm.
tuna boats. And Bucky was sitting across the street on a planter, and he had crutches. And as soon as he seen Matthew, he took his crutch up over his head, gimped really fast across the street, and smashed his crutch across Matthew's back and smashed him to the ground. Just
Yeah.
wham, like
Yeah.
that.
Wow.
It's like, oh no. Well, unbeknownst to me, Matthew was a brown belt in judo and very good.
Oh
And in 2 seconds, he
no.
flipped Bucky over and had him
Oh.
pinned on the ground. I mean, like just as fast as like on
Plot
TV.
twist.
So yeah,
Big
so
bad
he's
Bucky
holding him
didn't know.
down.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's saying stuff like, "Let's just talk this out now. You know, you're getting the wrong impression.
Oh
We're
my
not together.
God,
I'm just
that's
getting
so
a ride,"
funny.
and all this kind of stuff. Well, Bucky says, okay. And I go, "Don't trust him, don't trust him." And as soon as he got up, he started pummeling him, broke his glasses,
Yeah.
got him a fat
Wow.
lip, all this kind of stuff. And again, Matt grabs him, throws him down, and pins him. Says, "I'm not doing this. I'm not fighting you, bro. I'm not fighting you." It was like
Wow.
crazy. And I'm yelling, "Call the cops, call the cops." And so some lady in a hotel that was across the street called the police, and they show up. Just as they're showing up, I had jumped in the car. Bucket got away. I was trying to hold the door shut so he wouldn't, because I thought he might choke me or something. He was so angry. And he, with all of his force, grabbed the door away from me. I lost grip. He grabbed the door, opened it with such force that he ripped it off the car, and it went sliding down the hill on the snow.
Holy
Totally
crap.
ripped the car door off.
Yeah. Bucky ripped the car door off the
Right.
car.
And about that time, the cops showed up.
Oh man.
And they're saying, "What's going on here?" And he goes, "Oh, it's just domestic violence. It's me and my wife." And
Yeah.
and they didn't get involved in domestic violence with wives and husbands so much back then.
Yeah.
In
They
the 70s,
didn't, I
early
No, they
know.
didn't.
80s. And
Yeah.
I'm saying, "I'm not his wife. We're not married." He goes, "She's my wife. She's lying." So they left.
Wow. Just the
Their names.
picture being painted of the way women were treated
And
at
in
this period of
in
time
the
is
60s,
just
this
horrific.
is not even like
Yeah.
1820.
Yeah.
This is 1960.
Well, it's 1970 at this 1973 really at this point because
Oh,
the baby's
God.
3 years
Yeah,
old.
72. It was
Yeah.
72.
That's
Isn't that
so
wild?
Oh my God.
But
Yeah.
there's
And so,
and I know all and
No,
the
go
thing
ahead.
is like there are so many little stories that aren't getting put in here. Like the time that like the way that they had to figure out could my mom sign things for my brother because she wasn't even an
Couldn't have a
adult.
bank account
Yeah,
probably till
like-
what, 60s,
Yeah.
late 60s?
When she was the fastest track runner at her school, but the school was ashamed to have an unwed mother be a star athlete, so they forbid her from being on the track team. When she
oh
found,
yeah, that was probably one of the only things I ever really felt bad about.
trying
I
to
wish
take,
that my only regret.
trying to take my brother to the pool, and they were like, "You have to have a parent with you because you're only 2." And my mom's like, "But
I was 16.
yeah, he's my
Yeah.
kid," and they wouldn't believe her, and like just and you can talk to my brother about this stuff now too, and he remembers some of these stories and like what it was
Oh, yeah.
like for her trying to
As
navigate
a minor mother.
right in a world that already treats women like second class citizens.
Terribly.
And
Clearly.
in a world where like and again like everybody and my mom knows this, so like everybody keep your panties on. Everybody knows that I'm like a pro-choice person. But part of that is how dare anyone try to force her to get rid of her baby. That's part of being pro-choice.
Yeah, that's part of, yeah, sure.
Right?
Yes.
But like the world that she was living in was trying to force her hand in this way. And like it's such an interesting story. And then dating Buck the whole time. And what's going to happen now is I'm going to fast forward some things. Cuz you guys broke up. You dated Matt Neal for a while. You wound up graduating from high school, Probably the
Went
first
to nurse.
the first unwed mother in your entire.
Well, one thing I got to say, I remember when I was a senior in high school and Matthew was going to Peninsula College and I was getting ready to graduate and I was so sad because I didn't know what I was going to do. And we were sitting around the table at Matthew's parents' house and they kind of adopted me as one of their kids. They were a wonderful family. And I remember being kind of sad and his dad said, "Well, Kelly, what are you going to do next year?" I says, "I don't know." He goes, "You're not going to go to college?" And I go, "I don't think I can go to college." He goes, "Why not? You've been going to school all these years.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't you keep going?" And I said,
Yeah.
"Well, I don't have any money." He says, and so his mom piped up and said, "Well, go get your FAFSA forms. I'll help you fill them out." So
Yeah.
they actually helped me fill out my college entrance and encouraged me to keep going to school. And I went and talked to the same lady who was
Yeah.
my social worker that I had all those years.
Mm-hmm.
She says, "Oh, certainly you can go to school. There's funding for you. If you want to go to school, you can."
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to college. It was like a miracle. I was so excited because I told the Lord, I said, "I really wish I could go to college. All my friends are going to college." But I just remember Mr. Neal said, "Well, why can't you go to school, Kelly? You've been going all this time. You could just keep going." And I thought, I never thought of it. It was crazy.
Talk to me a little bit about your relationship with God and Jesus during all of this too, because you were living with you were living with your grandma, who was a Seventh Day Adventist and a very strong Christian. Did you go to church with them?
Yeah, every Saturday we
Yeah.
go, unless I was, had plans or something. Like sometimes Bucky's parents would take
Yeah.
us and we'd go like on a picnic or something. But
Yeah.
yeah. And but it was kind of a silent time because I was sort of rebellious
Mm-hmm.
and wanted to do my own thing. I didn't think it was a bad thing. The things I did was bad, but
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't really thinking, "Oh, the Lord, what does the Lord want me to do?" I was kind of doing my own thing. And so, like when I was in college, I didn't realize how much homework I had to do in college, and I was overwhelmed. And my son got the measles or got chicken pox, and then I got sick. Then I had
Mm-hmm.
to have my wisdom teeth pulled. All these things happened all at once, and it was overwhelming. So I withdrew with the incomplete from
Mm-hmm.
college. I
Mm-hmm.
got some of my work done, which was good because later it helped me. I had my science, my English, I had that first semester of everything done,
Mm-hmm.
English 101, all that. Second semester is when everything kind of went downhill. So I decided to drop out and I thought, well, I always wanted to be a hairdresser. Maybe I'll go to beauty school.
Mm-hmm.
So I went into beauty school and that's where I met your dad.
And that's where you met my
Was
dad.
at beauty school. Yeah.
So, and this is where I'm going to do the fast forwardy stuff. So you meet my dad, you guys get married. He adopts Dennis, the little boy, and
Yeah.
you guys had my sister Brooke when you were 20, and then you had me when you were 25. No, you had Brooke when you were 23, and then me when you were 25.
Well,
And then you and my dad decided to adopt a boy that would be in between Dennis and Brooke, because there was
'cause
like
there
an
was 8 years
gap
difference,
in
and
there.
so we just filled the gap.
And
Mhm.
you guys both become hairdressers and you're opening salon. You opened a salon together and you're living your life. And meanwhile, Bucky also gets married and has children. And what is your contact with him, and what's his contact with Dennis, the little boy, during those periods of time? Him married, having kids, you getting married, having kids, living your lives.
Yeah, it was an arrangement where he paid child support. He always paid child support. He never got behind on child support. And he had the same rights as if we had been married and divorced.
Mm-hmm.
So he had weekend, every other holiday.
Mm-hmm.
We used to split the holidays. He would do Christmas Eve, we would do Christmas Day.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of changed a little bit when Sean was in the picture because we moved to Montana
Mm-hmm.
for a while. And so there was a distance that was a little bit. I mean, Bucky had kids of his own and a family. They couldn't like just hop in the car and go to Montana and get Dennis. And so that was kind of a 3-year gap there. But he was just like an on hands parent. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he and Tina, his wife, loved Dennis. They bought him. I remember they were going to take him to see the Hulk. It was like this big hype for the People's store. The Hulk is going to be here. The Hulk is going to be here. And when they got there, was some guy in a paper mache outfit, and Dennis was so disgusted because he thought it was going to be Lou Ferrigno. So he was very upset. And there's a picture of him looking so
that is a
disgruntled, but he took the
bummer.
picture
Yeah.
anyway. But I mean, they went to his soccer games, and they were pretty involved for biker drug addicts.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, which is kind of like
Yeah.
another theme in this particular story is all the people that, in our society would have been labeled the other have been really good people in their
Oh
core
yeah,
and have
they
been
were
really
very
helpful
good.
to
He
you.
always worked,
Yeah.
always a good provider.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like, and Tina and I were not enemies. I
Yeah.
mean,
Sure.
she was the stepmom to Dennis and was very kind to him and
Mhm.
loved him, So so that's how that relationship kept going. And then we moved back from Montana. Some financial things happened and we moved back, and Dad wanted to buy back our old salon, which we did. And we got back, and I remember I wanted to go see Tina because they just had a new baby, and I wanted to see how the kids looked because they were half siblings to my little boy. And I remember I was sick, and I thought, oh, I'll go next week when I'm not sick because they got a new baby. And then she died. It was like she overdosed.
Yeah.
And it was like,
Yeah.
I remember Bucky's sister called me and said, oh, Tina's died. Tina's died. And I thought she must be mistaken. She must mean it was her sister, Dottie,
Yeah.
not Tina. And I was so sad, And then immediately in my mind, I thought, Bucky's not married anymore. And I thought, that's a horrible thing to think. That's a horrible thing to think. Why would you think that?
Well,
Which now I think,
the reason you thought that is because your marriage to my dad sucked because my dad's gay.
yeah, he
And
was
you
having
guys
affairs.
my dad has said this to me. I don't know if you've said this to me, but my dad has said to me, you guys were like best friends. And you were you were in a band together, and you had this salon together, and you had this wonderful friendship. But my dad was not able to be honest about his own experience, and
Yeah.
frankly was putting you in danger and everybody in danger with some of his choices. And so so that's all going on simultaneously. So you guys end up getting divorced, and I remember that because I was 5, and then and of course Tina
Well, what
had
happened
passed
is
away.
Bucky had gone to Alaska to get clean and sober
Mm-hmm.
because his wife had died. So he voluntarily put his kids in foster care.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we ended up with. I remember telling myself if anything ever happened to Tina, I was going to get those kids because I knew he'd be a mess. And so the tribal group in those days, Native American kids had to be placed with Native American families.
Tina was Native American, everybody.
Right.
We didn't
And
mention
so the lady that was the case manager was someone that we'd gone to high school with. And she called me and she said, would you be willing to take these 2 little babies? Because the baby was 3 months old and the other little girl was 18 months, or no, was 14 months old.
Yeah.
And then Glenn was 5 and going to go to his grandma. And the 2 older kids were going to go to Chris and Dawn, the aunt and uncle.
Glenn was younger
But
than
these
that.
2 little baby girls had nowhere to go. And so she said, what we'll do is we will say, because Dennis is a half sibling, there's the bloodline connection, and you can have him while because he's going to Alaska.
Yeah.
So he went up to Alaska to get clean and sober, and I ended up with Mary Rose in Georgia, which is your the little babies. Had them for about till October, and by that time I was going through my divorce, and the kids had gone. Bucky had come back down, and he was in his own place, had the kids, was getting his kids back. I was in that little white house we moved to because all of the marriage was over. And I remember Bucky's mom called me and said, Buck's doing real well, maybe you ought to think about getting a hold of him and, seeing how he's doing. And I said, oh, well, yeah, sure, have him call me. And as soon as I hung up the phone, I remember thinking, you idiot, why would you have him call you? That's like old water under the bridge. Forget that. Well, on the other side, his mom said to him, oh, I talked with Kelly and she'd kind of like you to give her a call. Why don't you see if she'll go out with you?
She's
Just get
parent
together for a
trapping
visit.
you.
Yeah.
See if you can get Dennis. And so his mom told him that I said to call him. So he calls me and asks me out for dinner. And I remember thinking, sure, I'll be glad to meet you. I'm driving my own vehicle, but I'll meet you, It was so crazy. And so we met at the Sawtooth restaurant, and it was so awkward, that first course of the meal. But by dessert, it was like, he turned out to be the person I always thought he could be, clean and sober, doing good, had some clear vision about where he wanted to go. And I still loved him. It was so weird after all those years.
But you had a trepidation.
Well, that happened a little bit later. We were kind of going off and on, and he had to go back up to Alaska. because he still had some problems. And when he came back down, he was going to get some heroin. And he was sitting at the A&W waiting for his contact. And he said while he was sitting there, he heard someone say, Buck. And he looked around thinking, who the heck? The windows aren't open. Who was that? And then he heard the name again, Buck. He said, all the hair stood up on my body, and I knew exactly who it was. And it was God. And the God told him, you can either choose life or you can choose death. This is a crossroads. And so I know. And so he said, right at that minute, he knew that God was powerful and that he was like a little ant that could be squished in a second, but that God loved him and, cared enough to talk to him personally. So he said his supplier drove up and he got in the car with her and he said, no, I quit. And she goes, oh yeah, right. What, you don't have any money? I'll front it to you. And she said she threw some heroin on the seat. And he said there was such an urge to just pick it up and say, heck with it. He goes, nope, I quit. Seriously, I quit. She goes, you'll call me. He goes, no, I won't. And he left. And so he borrowed my car and I was working at Safeway and he came to pick me up and he had this glow, this total glow on his face. And I thought, that jerk went and got heroin. Look at him. He looks so happy. He's higher than a kite. And we went to his parents' house. I was so mad. And I said, look at you, look at you. And I fought with him. I says, what's wrong with you? Are you back on drugs? I thought you said you quit. And he was so angry. So he upped into the house and he put the paper up like he was reading the paper, but it was upside down. So I knew I wasn't reading it. And so
Classic.
I went over there and I smashed the paper with my hand, the back of my hand. And I says, yeah, that's real great. I'm gone for like a few hours at work and you get high. So we stormed out of the house and I'm going, that's what you do. Run away. That's always what you do. And he turned around and he had this look on his face. And I thought, oh, he had this look on his face. He goes, Kelly, God talked to me. I go, he did? Immediately I knew he wasn't high. God talked to me. I go, did he say anything about me? Which is so stupid. As we laughed and laughed, he goes, no, but I'm off drugs. I'm clean and sober. I'm not doing drugs anymore. And so it was so crazy. And a couple nights later, he came over to talk to me and he was going to take Dennis up for ice cream or something. And he ended up taking all the kids. He took, I guess it was him and Victor. And I remember the Lord told me, you're going to marry Bucky Keys. And I thought, oh, that's crazy. And he said it again, you are going to marry Bucky Keys. And I sat up in bed and I remember saying, Lord, if that's you, say it again. He goes, you're going to marry Bucky Keys. And it was so weird because a couple of months later, he asked me to marry him. He goes, Kelly, my kids are starting to love you. I love you. We can't do this to my children. We're either going to get married and make a family or we have to break up because it's going to just break their hearts if we don't do something. And so I said, well, I don't know if you could marry me. He goes, hey, listen, when I marry you, I'm marrying you, marrying your family, marrying your dad. I don't care. I'm marrying all of you. Don't worry about it, honey. We'll take care of it. So we got married. It was so crazy. We moved into the house in January. He had to go back up to Alaska. So we weren't married yet. And I had all these kids. And I remember thinking, like, what am I doing? This is crazy. I have 9 kids. What am I doing? This is insane.
Yeah.
Double the recipe, add bread and salad, and that's dinner.
The other day, I made something for dinner and it was just like a 1-pot meal. And Dylan goes, your mom would be so disappointed because you didn't add bread and salad. Don't tell your mom you didn't add bread and a salad. Yeah.
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 So when we got married, we got married on the same weekend that they always have the irrigation festival. So that was kind of cool. And we got married and we came home and I totally had an anxiety attack and had to go to bed. So our anniversary night, me and my mom and Bucky had gone to dinner.
Yeah.
And they ran into his old probation officer. And he knew my mom and he goes, oh, you two. Oh, are you kids still together? Because people would think we'd been together all these years because they hadn't seen us. Mm-hmm. And Buck said, we just said, oh, yeah. Kind of shined it on. Because we were sort of a legend at school in a way because first kids to have a baby. And
you stayed together the whole time until you got in that big fight about him wanting you to drop out of school.
Yeah. And then we got married in May of 88, May 12th of 88.
Mm-hmm. I was 7 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he was the best babies. Stepdad. He was so
he
awesome.
Loved you guys.
He loved, he loved me just like, because I was so much, he always used to say that I was so much like my mom. And because he'd known my mom her whole life, it was like he was mine. And I remember one time in the 2nd grade, I was trying to do my math homework. And of course, my stepdad dropped out of high school. Yeah, that's the big spoiler alert, everyone. This is my stepdad we're talking about this whole time. Bucky Keys, right? I remember because, he dropped out of school, and that was always the thing, I was in second grade and I needed help with my homework, and you were busy. And he was like, well, I'll help you with your math. And I was like, you didn't graduate from school. Right. And this great big bear of a man with he could crush a walnut in between his bicep and his forearm. I'm not joking. He could crush an egg in the palm of his hand like you're not supposed to do. He ripped a car door off of a vehicle, right?
Yes, that is,
this was
crazy.
My stepdad, right? And I remember he just put that big giant bear paw on my shoulder and the kindest, sweetest face. And he said, well, honey, I can do second grade math.
That's great.
I sent him a Father's Day card one year because I eventually moved, out with. And we'll talk about that. The thing is, the sad part is that we're reaching the hour mark, and so we haven't even gotten to the point of the part of the story, which is to talk about your own challenges with your mental health during this, and your faith, and how your faith has carried you through all of that. So, but there was a period of time where I ended up moving in with my dad. And I sent him a Father's Day card, and it was like, of all the men in the world that my mother could have married, how lucky am I that she married you? And that was my Father's Day card to him. And Mom said that it was like Thanksgiving, and she was like, honey, we got to take the card off the table because we got it. And he was like, no, that's my card for teasing you.
Aww, that's very sweet.
Because here's the other spoiler alert. My stepdad passed away from cancer in 2000 and was it 4?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So he was my stepdad till I was 23. And then he passed away.
Well, the caveat, if this is where we have to end, I would say I would end it with, he was working in Alaska. I was down south with 8 kids. The oldest boy had moved in with his stepdad.
Yeah.
And I remember praying at church, Lord, is there any way Bucky could come home and get a job? Is there any way we could bring him home? And I remember Dwight prayed for me. A bunch of people were praying for me, people I didn't know at this little church we started going to. And in about a week after that prayer, the owner of the business where he worked had a heart attack and died. And they had to disperse everything. And he came home with no job. And it's like, Lord,
that's not what I meant.
Yeah, that's not what I asked for. Thank you.
Thanks anyway.
Oh my gosh.
Living alone with all those kids, no income. He had a little bit of unemployment to get us through. And that's a whole nother story. What happened after that.
Yeah.
And that's what eventually I had my mental health issues, but
yeah. Right.
But that's what happened. So
what we're going to do is, I don't know exactly how long we've been recording. This has been about an hour. We're going to do a part 2 to this particular episode. And so because this is such a good story, and it's such a rich story, because, and I think, because I've talked about myself on this show. And so listeners have heard me talk about little bits and pieces of my childhood and things and my relationship with God. So I think it's really interesting to also add the other side of the story, because I have this one memory. And so I'll give the listeners a spoiler alert for the next period of time. As everybody listening and who has heard the life that you've lived can imagine, when you found yourself now with all of these children by yourself, 5 of whom had lost a mother and were struggling. And the youngest 3 were born with addiction issues because they were exposed in utero. And so they had, behavioral challenges that you were navigating as well. During all this period of time, somewhere in there, your dad, your favorite parent, passed away. Yeah. And so in the midst of all of this turmoil, you went to the doctor. And what happened?
Yeah. And he put me on Effexor, which he had samples of. And it seemed to help. And every time I would go to see him, I was still having problems. And I wasn't really able to articulate what was going on. And he thought I was still having depression. In reality, I was having anxiety and stress and all that. He kept upping the dose. And of course, I'm obeying my doctor, taking my medication. And it put me into a manic swing. I had a psychotic break and a manic swing off of this Effexor.
Yeah. And we've learned this now. So Effexor, Mom, so now that you're a nurse practitioner who prescribes medications, and you're actually in school to become a psychiatrist. Tell us about Effexor. What was it?
Well, it's a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, which is it's a medication that prevents your brain from taking serotonin out of the synapses and sort of recycling it. It keeps it in there so it'll brighten your mood, basically.
So it's antidepressant.
And so my mood was being so brightened, I was going crazy. I mean, I thought I was supposed to ditch all you kids and go to the Philippines and be a missionary to the kids in the garbage dumps of the Philippines. And I remember your dad said, Bucky said, honey, why would the Lord want you to go take care of those kids when we have some of our own here?
Yeah.
And we're thinking, that makes sense. I mean, I just was like, do you remember me running down after the bus because I was having these little visits with God with the Bible, and we weren't done, and I wanted to make sure you heard the end of it. So I'm running down the road after the bus with the Bible in my hand, in my pajamas, preaching the end of the story, which I was crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, because I've done some research. I've actually looked into this, and because Effexor was one of the first antidepressants that came on the market in the 90s, and this was mid to late 90s, right? So I was born in 81. Grandpa Don died when I was like 10, 11. So this is like 91, 92. This is happening to you. There were lots of people that doctors were like, oh, this drug is magic. And they were prescribing it like water. Mm-hmm. But because it's now, and you've said this to me before, now as a practitioner, you reserve Effexor for only the most severe cases of depression. You start with a Wellbutrin or a Zoloft or something like that, which is a much more milder form. But there were plenty of people, lots of people, that what this was doing was throwing people's brains into a bipolar spin.
Into mania.
And then they would go to their doctors, and their doctors would just up the dose.
Well, now you would put somebody on a mood stabilizer, so you wouldn't have those swings. You'd get the benefit of the medication, but it wouldn't make you go insane.
Right.
That's a good thing.
Right. And then when you would try to stop taking it, if there was ever a period of time where you were like, screw this, I think it's the drugs, and you would stop taking it, you can't just do that. And so
you have a very bad withdrawal.
Right.
And, like, it's vomiting, stomach cramps, headaches, dizziness. It's very horrible.
One of the things, and again, so we're going to continue this because this episode is really about, it's for Mother's Day, which is going to be coming up, and then we're going to do another follow-up episode where we talk specifically about, mental health and the awareness of it, because I think especially, and we've discussed this in here before, especially on the Burros of Berea podcast, which is Rick's show that I'm on, the way that the Christian community can sometimes refuse to acknowledge that you can both be saved and have horrible things happen. And we've talked about that in terms of child loss, Christians that lose children, and how you get through that. And one of the things I think that's pretty magical about your story is the way that your faith carried you through this next period of time, which is what we're going to talk about on our next episode of Notes from the Other Side, where we have the second part to this really incredible story with Kelly Hains, nurse practitioner on the Navajo Nation in Arizona.
Crazy.
Yeah. All right. Folks, we'll see you next time. And, Mom, I'll call you on my way home.
We'll talk more in a minute.
All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you soon.
It was great. Thank you.
Folks, if you're enjoying this episode, you might really enjoy some of the benefits that come with being a Patreon subscriber. Over at patreon.com, we have different levels of membership, and starting for as low as $2 a month, you'll get access to things like all of the notes that I use to make these episodes, bits of script that didn't make it into the show, and even bibliographies about the books that I read to get where I'm going. Through Patreon, you even have access to some of the video that we take for the show. So some of those interviews that you like so well, you'll get to watch them in real time. So once again, head over to patreon.com/NFTOS, as in Notes from the Other Side. That's patreon.com/NFTOS for more information about becoming a Patreon subscriber to this show. Thanks, guys. Catch you later. Okay, and that's the end of the show.
I feel the problem is there's no.
Wow.
I know. Rick usually does this.
There you go.
Yeah, and then Andy makes this little.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. See, I can't hear him at all.
You can't hear me? Oh, the settings are wrong. Yeah, she's hearing you from the laptop.
So
That's
if
why.
I cut him off, I didn't mean to. I can't hear him at all.
Oh, we
So-
should put that in the end of the show because there are
Yeah.
several times where Andy tried to ask a question and you just barreled right over him. Oh, no.
I should have intuited that that's what's happening. The sound is coming out, but
I
it's
didn't know if
not
I was supposed to
looking.
hear him.
Wow.
I didn't know if he was like off.
So even as he's
Yeah.
talking right now,
No, she
you
can't-
can't hear
yeah.
him at all.
I can't hear him.
Oh my
No.
gosh, Mom, you should totally
Yeah.
listen to this episode when it comes out. It's going to sound so different to you. Like,
Well, I'm not talking that much, thankfully.
no, but still. Wow. All right. Well, I'm going to hang this up because I got now. So, Mom, I'm going to text you a picture of his poop.